has not run again in either 1984 or even currently in 1988. Apparently, his purpose was to defeat Jimmy Carter. The Trial Commission played a major role in the 1980 election. Of the 5 major candidates in the race that year, 4 of them were members of the Trial Commission. Of the Democrats, both Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale were members of the Trial Commission. The independent, John Anderson, was, as I said, a member of the Trial Commission. George Bush, the Republican vice presidential candidate, was a member. Of the 5 men running, only Ronald Reagan was not a member of the Trial Commission. Apparently, the game plan worked. Jimmy Carter was prevented from being reelected. I'd like to shift the direction a little and now discuss the presidential election of 1980. If the election of 1976 was to elect Jimmy Carter, and if the election of 1980 was to remove Jimmy Carter and elect Ronald Reagan, then the election of 1984 was to re-elect Ronald Reagan by having Walter Mondale, the candidate of the Democratic Party, throw, notice the word, throw the election. Walter Mondale, as I said, was a member of the Trial Commission. Before we discuss the 1984 election, I'd like to talk a little about the Democratic candidate himself, Walter Mondale. During the campaign, Walter Mondale claimed to be a Christian. This article appeared in the Arizona Daily Star on September the 8th, 1984. The headline reads, "Mondale says his political career expresses his Christian faith." The article says that Mondale's, quote, "political career is an expression of his Christian faith," unquote. He apparently experienced a recent conversion, and I would like to congratulate him for figuring it out, because in 1970, just 14 years before he said he was a Christian, Walter Mondale was a professed atheist. According to this book, entitled The Sika Circle, A Humanist Revolution by Claire Chambers, Walter Mondale was a humanist, and we're going to discuss that. And humanists are atheists. In 1970, Walter Mondale said this, number 2, "Although I have never formally joined a humanist society, I think I am a member by inheritance. My preacher father was a humanist, and I grew up on a very rich diet of humanism from him, my father, my preacher father. All of our family has been deeply influenced by this tradition, including my brother Lester." Mr. Mondale's brother, Lester, showed that the teachings of their father had a very dramatic effect on him when he signed the first Humanist Manifesto. We can all read the manifesto as it has been reprinted in this little pamphlet entitled, and I put it in the green cover myself, there it is, called Humanist Manifestos 1 and 2. The second manifesto was issued in 1973, the first in 1933. First, let me say that humanism and Christianity are not compatible. Humanism says, number 3, we find insufficient evidence for belief in the existence of a supernatural. In fact, the humanists go on to say, number 4, the time has passed for theism. Theism is defined as a belief in a God or gods, a supreme being or beings. So Mr. Mondale had to completely renounce the teachings of his father and the beliefs of his brother when he professed his belief in Jesus Christ, if he now believes that Jesus was the Son of God. What else did Walter Mondale believe in when he said he was a humanist in 1970? We're going to cover humanism in more depth in a few weeks, but I'd like to briefly discuss the beliefs of the religion known as humanism. And I'd like to say that I am quoting directly from their own writings. The humanists have told us directly what they believe in. And remember that Walter Mondale said that his father was a humanist and that he and his brother Lester were both deeply influenced by their father. And don't forget that Lester Mondale, Walter's brother, signed not only the first Humanist Manifesto in 1933, but the second as well in 1973. The 1933 Humanist Manifesto described the type of economic system they believed in. Humanists say this, number 5. The humanists are firmly convinced that existing acquisitive and profit-motivated society has shown itself to be inadequate. In other words, the free enterprise system doesn't work. And that a radical change in methods, controls, and motives must be instituted. Here's what they believe in, the humanists. A socialized and cooperative economic order must be established that the end, that the equitable distribution of the means of life be possible. Now, where have we heard that before? The humanists sound like Marxists to me. Karl Marx wrote of his vision of a socialized and cooperative economic order in these terms. Number 6, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. The humanists are Marxists. I didn't say that. They said that themselves. Now we understand a little about what Mr. Mondale believed in. Let's now examine his 1984 election. I want to start by saying that I believe that Walter Mondale, the Democratic candidate for president, intentionally threw the election of 1984. Walter Mondale wanted to lose the election. I'm not the only one, by the way, who believes that way. This cartoon said it in another way. It shows Walter Mondale holding up the Chicago Daily Tribune that headlines, "Mondale defeats Mondale." Now, how did Mondale defeat Mondale? He did two extremely puzzling and damaging things. Number 1, Walter Mondale promised to increase our taxes. Not only did he promise a tax increase, he proposed it at a time when he had the largest audience at any one time at the Democratic Convention. More people were watching that night to what he had to say than he would ever have before or again in his campaign. There is no larger audience for either the Democratic or presidential nominee than the night of his acceptance speech at the convention. More people will tune in that speech than the candidate will ever get a chance to address during the campaign at a single time. Rule number 1 of any political campaign, be it for city council, mayor, congressman, senator, or for the presidency, is do not promise a tax increase. I repeat, never promise a tax increase. Yet in front of his largest audience, Walter Mondale, in his acceptance speech, said this, number 7, "Let's tell the truth. Mr. Reagan will raise taxes, and so will I. He will tell you, I just did." I would dare say that as soon as the American people heard that, 20 million people turned off their sets and voted not to vote for Walter Mondale. A very damaging statement to make. We've run out of time for tonight. I'd like to invite you to tune in again next week as we continue to explore the secrets of history. Thank you so very, very much.